their captors or refused orders were whipped or branded. The corsairs believed fear kept men alive longer than hope, but not all captors were monsters in the simplest sense. There are accounts of kindness, or something close to it. A captured French pilot once wrote that his master treated him well because he could navigate European waters, and the corsair needed him alive. Another Englishman was spared the oar because he could play the violin, which amused the day's court. Survival, it seemed, was often a matter of skill or chance. Still, the transition from freedom to slavery left deep scars. The historian Robert Davis once wrote that the Barbary slave system operated like an industrial process, cold, efficient, and devoid of mercy. Every captive had a value, every injury a cost, every ransom a profit margin. And yet, within that machinery, individual lives unfolded. Men who learned Arabic, who prayed in mosques, who dreamed of escape, but woke each day to the sound of waves slapping against the hulls of ships they'd once feared. As you listen to this, imagine standing on that dock in Algiers, the sun burning above, the chain biting into your wrist. You've lost your name, your country, your sense of time. Around you, traders argue in a language you don't know. Somewhere beyond the harbour, you can hear church bells drifting faintly from a European ship, so close, yet impossibly far. What would you hold on to in that moment? Faith, memory, or simply the hope that someone, somewhere, still remembered your name? When you picture slavery, the mind leaps to chains, to whips, to darkness, and yes, those were all part of it. But what made Barbary slavery truly cruel was its routine. It wasn't always the spectacle of violence that broke people. It was the repetition, the slow erosion of the self beneath a system that turned men into numbers and hope into currency. For most captives, the first stop was the Bagnio, a prison workshop complex that served as both barracks and labour depot. The word would later evolve in European languages to mean bathhouse or even brothel. But in the 17th century, it meant one thing, a place where Christian slaves were kept. The Bagnio of Algiers was vast. Picture stone walls sweating with humidity, the air heavy with the smell of men who hadn't seen fresh air in weeks. Hundreds slept side by side on straw mats, chained in pairs or small groups. In the mornings, overseers would enter with lists, calling out names or numbers to assign the day's labour. Some were sent to the harbour to haul timber or repair ships. Others worked in quarries, mines, or on construction projects ordered by the day. The strongest were reserved for the galleys, the floating prisons that powered the corsair fleet. The galley slaves endured the worst. Chained to benches, they rode for hours under the lash, their bodies blistered by salt and sun. The smell of sweat and decay hung over the oars. When storms hit, they weren't unshackled. Many drowned, still bound to the benches, and yet without them, the corsairs could not hunt, could not capture, could not sustain the very trade that had brought those same men here. It was a self-feeding system of suffering, but not all captives lived at the oar. Skilled artisans, carpenters, stonemasons, tailors, and sailors could be hired out to private employers. A few became servants in wealthy households. These positions offered marginally better food, lighter chains, and the chance to earn small amounts of money, coins that could one day contribute to their ransom. Still, they remained property. A man who angered his master could be sold, beaten, or sent back to the bagnio without warning. Women, though less numerous than men, faced a different fate. Many were absorbed into domestic service or harems. Some were converted to Islam and married to their captors, willingly or not. Their stories are the hardest to trace because few were ever written down. What survives are glimpses, letters from monks mentioning Christian maidservants in Tunisian households, or court records noting ransoms paid for wives taken by the Turks. Behind those sterile words are untold lives of adaptation, resilience, and silence. Religion shaped every part of this world. The captives were infidels, and their treatment reflected their status as outsiders. They were often forced to wear distinctive clothing, coarse wool, sometimes dyed in dull colours so they could be identified in the streets. Conversion to Islam offered a path out of bondage, though not always an easy one. Some converted sincerely, drawn to the faith of their captors. Others did so to escape the lash. Those who converted were known as renegades in European accounts, though in truth many lived in the uneasy space between two worlds, never fully accepted by either. Every Sunday, or Friday, depending on who you asked, prayers rose from both sides of the wall. Inside the barrio, Christian priests, themselves slaves, led secret services in whispered Latin. Outside, the muezzin's call echoed from the minarets. The two sounds mingled in the air, neither silencing the other, an unintentional harmony born of captivity. Some captives managed to carve small freedoms within their confinement. They organized themselves into groups by nationality, English, Dutch, French, Italian, and elected spokesmen to negotiate with guards. They played music, carved trinkets from bone, told stories to pass the long nights. In the archives of Malta, one can find lists of gifts sent by ransom orders, rosaries, blankets, tobacco, all meant to sustain morale while they waited for the slow machinery of redemption to turn. Ransom was a constant topic. Every conversation seemed to circle back to it. When will the next ship come? Did the priest write home? Has anyone heard from the consul? Letters were smuggled through traders, missionaries, or even sympathetic Muslims who saw profit in delivering messages. Some captives managed to buy paper and ink, scratching out pleas in trembling script. Others dictated their words to fellow prisoners who could write. These letters often reached Europe months or years later, by which time the sender might already be dead. The ransom orders, especially the Trinitarians and Mercedarians, worked tirelessly to negotiate releases. They kept ledgers filled with names, ages, occupations, and ransom prices. It's strange, leafing through those old lists today. You can still feel the humanity pressing through the ink. William Gray, age 22, sailor, taken off Malaga. Ransom, 60 crowns. Maria da Costa of Lisbon, taken near Madeira. Ransom, 80 ducats. Each name, a story half told. Not all captives waited for rescue. Some escaped. The records are filled with astonishing tales of endurance. Men swimming miles under moonlight, disguising themselves as Muslims, or hiding aboard outgoing ships. John Rawlins, the English sailor we mentioned earlier, managed to seize control of a corsair galley with a handful of fellow slaves and sail it back to England. When he arrived, people didn't believe him at first. His accent had changed, his mannerisms were foreign, the sea had made him a stranger in his own country. Life in captivity had another cruel trick. Time lost meaning. Seasons blurred in the heat. Years slipped away unnoticed. Many who finally gained freedom returned home only to find their families gone or believing them dead. Some couldn't readjust and drifted back to sea, unable to belong anywhere else. Captivity had not only taken their bodies, it had remade their identities. Still, even in this world of oppression, there were flashes of humanity. Some North African masters freed old or sick slaves. Others allowed their servants to marry or live independently once they'd earned enough trust. In the diaries of missionaries, there are mentions of Muslim captors attending Christian masses, curious about their prisoners' faith. The lines between victim and oppressor, believer and infidel, sometimes blurred in ways that defy easy judgment. The Barbary system thrived not just on cruelty, but on endurance, the ability of both captor and captive to normalize what should have been unthinkable. It turned survival into habit, and habit into acceptance. That's perhaps the most haunting part of this history, how ordinary it became. And yet, amid the stone walls and iron chains, people found ways to remain human. They shared stories of home, whispered lullabies to each other in languages the guards couldn't understand, marked the passing of Christmas or Ramadan quietly in the dark. If you had been there, a prisoner in Algiers, a galley slave in Tunis, or a house servant in Tripoli, would you have clung to faith, to revenge, or simply to the rhythm of daily endurance? Freedom in the world of the Barbary states was not earned, it was bought, and the price was almost always higher than anyone could afford. For the rulers of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, captives were not simply labourers, they were assets. Every man and woman had a value that could rise or fall with the winds of politics. The ransom system was a business in itself, with brokers, translators, accountants, and priests all playing their parts. If a captured sailor was worth 60 ducats and a nobleman perhaps 600, it was only a matter of negotiation and time, always time. When a Christian was captured, his name was often recorded in ledgers kept by his captors and copied into corresponding lists maintained by European consuls and religious orders. Then began the waiting. Letters were dispatched across the sea, carried by merchants or sometimes by sympathetic Muslims who saw profit in courier work. Those letters often reached Europe months later, sometimes longer, and by then the conditions described inside them had already changed. Some captives died waiting, others were forgotten. But for those who survived long enough, redemption, that fragile promise, was their only prayer. The process could take years. Religious orders like the Trinitarians and Mercedarians devoted themselves entirely to freeing Christian captives. They travelled from town to town across Europe, collecting alms, coins, and jewellery, preaching sermons about the plight of our brothers in chains. Parish records from Portugal and Spain show entire communities raising funds for sailors they had never met. In England, public collections were held in churches, often with emotional pleas from former captives standing beside the pulpit as living proof of what the money could do. And yet, even the holiest intentions were entangled with politics. Every negotiation for ransom was also a test of diplomacy. Captives from powerful nations could become pawns in larger games, exchanged not just for gold, but for treaties, trade concessions, or naval truces. The Dey of Algiers understood that a well-timed release could buy him peace, or at least delay retribution. Mercy was rarely free. Inside the barrios, the hope of ransom shaped everything. Men whispered rumours about envoys arriving in the harbour, or about friars seen walking through the markets, the unmistakable sign that a redemption mission was underway. Prisoners who had been despondent for years suddenly stood straighter, combed their hair, tried to look younger, stronger, more valuable. Hope was its own form of currency, and hope could be cruel. Not every name was on the list.